Well, hey, everybody, this is Brooks York, Sterling Smith with AgriSompo North America Edge Group, and welcome you to the May marketing meeting. May is one of those critical months, kind of the starting point of a critical month for farmers across the country. May, June, and July, you've heard it a lot. Today, we've got a special guest with us, Jeff Doran. Jeff has been a visitor on the show in the past, and we're really going to concentrate on what causes this to be a critical time of the year, and that's weather events, whether here in the U.S. and now, something we didn't think of 25, 30 years ago. These weather events in May and June are not just critical in the U.S., but across the world. And Jeff is going to help us out, talk about some of these things that can impact prices. And when we talk about prices, Sterling, the market has come back to life, so to speak, led by wheat over the last few weeks. Give us some insight as to what's going on with those. Is this something we should expect this time of the year?
Well, the wheat, corn and soybeans are a little separate story from the wheat. Wheat has been driven largely by problems in Russia and in Europe. We've seen numerous cuts in Russian production ideas. We've come down from 91, 92 million tons. We're now sitting at 85, 86 million tons. There was just some news coming out overnight about some frost damaging some production areas. So that has sparked a fairly nice rally in wheat. We've seen some fund covering drive it. We have seen some improvement in European cash prices. There's also concerns about the quality of the wheat coming out of France. So that is working to move the wheat higher. When that moved higher, that triggered a round of tremendous fund buying in corn and soybeans. They took a lot of contracts off. In corn, there was about 109,000 short covered, along with about 30,000 new longs. In the soybeans, we saw about 85,000 contracts covered, which has propelled us higher. A couple of observations about that. One, we've stopped going up here the last couple of days and the market's starting to turn heavy again. Two, they bought all those corn contracts and it didn't really move the market that much. So there was somebody right there willing to sell right into this. So we need to keep that in mind, that this rally could prove to be a little bit hollow. And looking at corn this morning, and I'm going to go over the charts here, I'll point out why we're starting to look a little bit hollow here and how this may be concerning. But Jeff is probably going to have some news that might lead to some support down the road here, I think.
I think a combination of the time of the year, where the crop's at, what Jeff can tell us over the next few months is going to give people a lot of insight in what to look for. You heard caution in Sterling's tone there as far as what to expect out of this rally. I think no matter what you hear out of this meeting, we've kind of got to look at the fundamental situation, something we've preached for a long time, that we can afford to have some of those slip ups on our balance sheets when it comes to supply uh, glitches that are out there, whether that is a decline in yield by a slight number, a decline in acres planted by a slight number. We've built some supplies, but I think we got to stay awake at the wheel here over the next 90 days. There's going to be some opportunities. There's going to be some clues in the market to tell us what to do. Unfortunately, these prices for a lot of our producers are really not even at break-even levels yet. In a lot of cases across the country, there's some exceptions to that, and that's what makes this really, really tough. Do we see a nice rally and sell it, even though we know that we're not going to make a lot of money? We're going to talk about some of those strategies we may want to employ. But without further ado, we are grateful, Jeff, that you are with us today. And the focus for the whole market and the whole world right now, when it comes to the crop, is on weather. We've seen the WASDE reports come and go. The demand seems to be what it is. It's not changing much, so we have to turn our attention to that supply side, and that's why you're here. So welcome aboard. And like I said, just jump in and hang on. And with that, I'll kind of turn it over to Sterling and Jeff, and you guys take the lead and tell us what we need to know.
Brooks, thank you very much. And it is always great to be here with you guys. We really appreciate the partnership that we have together. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if I could, and we will get rolling. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, let's get started. So again, really pleased to be with you. Again, Jeff Doran, I'm director of our specialized support and services. I primarily support our agribusiness among other businesses that we support. And so I want to give you our early season outlook for agriculture. And again, this is something we do for all of our clients. So we're kind of dusting this off from the briefing we did last week. So I'm going to take you to a lot of different places, as Brooks has said before. So I want to take a short look back at kind of what's been happening and where we are now. So we'll talk about all these different weather parameters where we are. And then I'm going to build the story, right? We're going to look at the oceans. We're going to talk about the atmospheric factors that we're looking at. And then we'll kind of build on that, providing some short range information, monthly temperature precipitation forecast. We'll talk about all things weather, right, as you can see here. And then I definitely want to do a focus on South America. I mean, Sterling has already alluded to some of the difficulties we've seen with weather around the globe, but in particular, weather is really causing some issues in South America. And so I want to take a look at that in detail. Okay, so in terms of the weather impacts and highlights, I'm not going to read everything here, but you know, the biggest thing we're looking at right now is that we're in a transition. We've been in this very strong El Nino really since last year, but it is barely hanging on at this point. It's something we've been watching. We're going to be turning INSO neutral within the next month, and then you've probably all been hearing about it, is the return of La Nina. We're very confident that the La Nina will return. All of the guidance is pointing to that. You know, in terms of when that will officially be recognized, probably late summer. But again, we'll keep an eye on it because it will be providing some issues later in the season. As we look back at April, pretty mild for a lot of areas. We saw some bursts of summer-like readings during the month. So we got a surge in planting done fairly early. Cooler weather was in the west. Precipitation, you know, it's been a good period of precipitation starting in April. We had a lot of active weather come into the west. Got some good moisture events in the plains. Gulf of Mexico moisture brought periods of heavy rain into those areas. You'll see that western Kansas, south into West Texas, though, has kind of been missed. The Corn Belt, another month of exceptional moisture across the entirety of the region, frankly. All the soils are looking very good. I'll show you evidence of that. But I'll also show you evidence that of late, particularly as we turn the calendar into May, it's been so wet that planting pace has slowed down. So we'll show you some of that. The other thing I want to talk about here is severe storms. Very prevalent here over the last several weeks. We saw a significant tornado outbreak there in eastern Nebraska, western Iowa, and then extended into parts of the Ohio Valley as well. So just looking at that in map form, again, this is April, warmer temperatures east of the Rockies, as you can see there. But take a look at the precipitation anomalies on the right-hand side. Exceptionally wet. You can see across the entirety of the Corn Belt, 5, 6, 7 inches of rain over these areas across the northern plains into Texas. Looks very good. But take a look at the western high plains, particularly southern Kansas, down into West Texas and points west. That's the area that's continued to be missed. And I also talked about severe weather. So what you're looking at here is a synopsis of the severe weather events that have happened: red for tornado, blue for wind, and green for hail. And so during the month of April, about normal number of reports, you know, just shy of about 3,000 over the month of April. But now let's take a look at May. We're halfway through the month already, and the temperature and precipitation trends continue to be very similar. Again, generally warmer temperatures across the eastern part of the country, cooler across the west. And that kind of configuration really lends itself to significant severe weather, which we've seen during the month. And you can see the precipitation as a result, very heavy rains across much of the plains into the Corn Belt. So we're really starting to improve the moisture situation after what was concerns coming into the early part of the season. So that's improved. But I'll tell you what, this is now looking at severe weather for just the first half of May. And we have as many reports here in the first half of May as we got in all of April. So again, that cold west, kind of warm east, and the battleground that results from that has really spread a lot of the severe weather across most of these key growing areas. That even includes parts of Kansas, which have been fairly dry, and that's the issue with severe weather, is that you can get, you know, the strong winds and the hail, but not necessarily a lot of precipitation. And that's kind of what we're seeing in some of these drier areas. And just one more quick look. Take a look. This is looking at the tornado count year to date from the start of the year. The black line represents normal. The red line represents the number of tornado reports to date. You know, the number of reports were pretty much following the normal, even below normal through the end of April. But take a look at how much activity we've seen in the first half of May. I mean, we were down here just shy of 400 reports at the end of April. We're now about double that in about 2 weeks. So it's pretty incredible to see how much this optimal environment has really pushed those severe weather counts up. This is looking at the high wind events, again running above normal. This is looking at the large hail events after what was considerably below normal. Now we're looking at slightly above normal. So can't discount this enough. I mean, this is a scenario that's been pretty significant. And while early in the season, it's not typically as devastating because crops are still coming up out of the ground, you know, it's just an indication that severe weather is something we look at and can be a real wild card during the season. So we'll
Jeff, I'll jump in here, and
Sure,
I think you made a really good comment there. You know, to date, our claims numbers are running significantly below last year. If this trend continues through May, June, and July, it'll be really interesting to see if we see a coordination of those claim numbers come up with that severe weather.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm telling you, the pattern is going to continue to support, you know, a pretty active period. So,
What all the adjusters wanted to hear on the recording this morning.
Okay, I aim to please. What can I tell you? Okay, so let's. Oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Let me move forward. Okay, let's turn our attention now to moisture, and this is looking at what we call the root zone soil moisture. It's a percentile of wetness in the top meter of soil. And so the red and orange shadings represent below normal over that period. The blue represents above normal. And frankly, you know, while we're still holding on to some below normal wetness across parts of the Corn Belt, the situation has improved greatly. And you can see across the plains, it's looking fairly good. I will tell you, though, that eastern, southeastern Texas area has recently been the recipient of a lot of flooding. And so I think that's still vestiges of that. And you'll see some of the issues as a result of that. This is looking at today's drought monitor. It just came hot off the press. And look, there's not a lot of drought out there. I mean, we've seen a tremendous amount of moisture in the last several weeks. Now, there are problem areas. And take a look there at kind of that southwestern part of Kansas that just continues to get missed. I mean, they have storms rolling through there. They get some severe weather. They get a lot of wind, but they're not getting the moisture. And that's kind of the worst of both worlds. And that drought extends down toward the south, toward West Texas, and then into parts of the Southwest, an area that really has not been getting much in the way of moisture. And this is looking at the change in the drought intensity over the last 4 weeks. And look, there's a lot of green here, a lot of drought relief just in the last month or so over those areas. So I can't state enough how much this moisture is really, these rains have really helped the moisture situation. But again, there's that standout in southwestern Kansas. Okay, and partnering with Terrametrics Agriculture, we provide the weekly greenness information. We provide that in our weekly green report. This is just looking at the comparative views of greenness. Again, this is satellite-based NDVI. We have over 20 years worth of information that we can take a look at these comparative views. So when we compare it to last week, you know, it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, we're seeing increased greenness as we would expect across parts of the Corn Belt, even across some of those more northern areas that are starting to get involved. Spring's starting to break through up there. But we're seeing some decreased greenness across parts of the plains, and that's even more pronounced when we look at the right-hand picture versus the 20-year normal, where we're seeing much more of a mixed greenness scenario. Certainly, you can highlight Kansas, the very dry Kansas, with some of those greenness deficits there that we'll have to continue to monitor, because you know what we typically see is once we get drought established, and particularly as we're coming into the heat of summer, it's really hard to get rid of drought. Heat begets drought, begets more heat, and the cycle continues. So we really need to get moisture into this area fairly soon, or we're going to have some real issues in that high wheat area. This is looking at the planting progress again out of USDA, their crop progress report, and we're really starting to see some increasing deficits. So corn on the top, soybeans on the bottom. Again, comparing the planting progress to the 5-year average, and we're starting to see more slippage in terms of the corn and soybean planting pace. Generally, about a week behind normal. I mean, there's some spots that are actually about a week ahead. But overall, all of this wet weather and these low-lying areas are still seeing a lot of standing water, and we're not getting a lot of breaks between these storms. I mean, a day or two. So basically, a lot of these producers are planting between the raindrops because these storms just continue to come fast and furious. So what I've done here is we're providing you the mapping, which provides you more of an expansive look. So we've got corn across the top, planted on the left, emerged on the right-hand side, and then soybeans down at the bottom. Now, soybeans looks a little bit better in terms of the planted progress, as you can see. Big problems in Texas, though, as I mentioned before. They're a good 2 weeks behind, given all the wet weather they've had down there. Corn is a bigger problem. You can see all the brown there, which represents behind normal pace. In some cases, like Illinois, up to about 2 weeks from normal. So all of this wet weather, I mean, while the moisture is welcome, it is pushing back planting, and producers are really having to scramble to be able to get seed in the ground. That brings us kind of up to date. Brooks, I don't know if there's any questions before I kind of launch into kind of building the story for the summer.
I'll remind everybody, use the chat feature on here if you've got any questions. So far, I'll kind of echo what Jeff said. I know that when I talk to a fair amount of farmers, it slows down right now with farmers in the field as far as my inbound calls. But Jeff, I can tell you there's a lot of farmers that are just pretty demoralized. I would suspect we'll see a lot of replanting claims come in here over the next 10 days, even in some of the heart of corn country, just with these frequent rains. It does seem like farming a few acres myself, it seems like the windows have just been so small to get much planted. It's been a challenge this year.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks for validating that. We're hearing that from all of our clients who are working with producers as well. So yeah, and the pattern looks like it's going to continue. So I'm at the point now where I want to build the story going forward. So this is now looking at what we call the sea surface temperature anomalies. That's differences from normal across the global basin. A couple things to kind of show you here. First of all, that box in the equatorial Pacific is what we call the ENSO region. So as we animate this over the last 30 days, take a look at the increasing blue, or the cold water that is now starting to take over, if you will, the strong warmth that we've seen associated with the El Nino. So that's a trend that's only going to continue through the course of the upcoming season. A couple other areas that are a little bit closer to home in the U.S. Again, a lot of cooler water off of the West Coast. That has supported generally low pressure storms. Again, it's been cooler in the West, and it's supported this idea of significant severe weather that we've seen. Also take a look at the Atlantic and that other kind of dotted box there. That's what we call the main development region. So it is very, very warm coming into the season. Many of you probably heard already a lot of alarmist commentary about the tropical season ahead. And certainly it feels like with an oncoming La Nina, which tends to support more active storms in the Atlantic anyway, and the fact you've already got very, very warm water over these activation areas, we could be looking at a very significant Atlantic hurricane season. Now, does that mean that we're going to see any more landfalls than typical? That doesn't necessarily mean that, but it means we're going to be looking at, we feel comfortable with the idea of above normal number of storms. And so then it's really about, how assessing the potential impact going forward during the season. So these storms tend to ramp up, June, July timeframe, and it's really that back part of the season into harvest that tends to be the most active period of time. So that's something we'll continue to take a look at. So I mentioned before that we are moving rapidly out of the El Nino. This is a depiction from the folks at the Climate Prediction Center who actually forecast these probabilities, if you will, and you can see the color shadings represented here. We're moving very rapidly again out of that El Nino, which had been with us for the better part of a year. And, this is just one solution, but generally most of the model solutions that we're looking at looks to be very similar in terms of the better probabilities, the highest probabilities of La Nina coming in kind of that July, August, September time period, and then only increasing as we head through the remainder of the season. So when we look at the factors, again, it's ENSO, and it's really important for us to monitor this because while every La Nina event can be different, if you go back through history, I will tell you that La Nina summers can be pretty rough. We had a La Nina summer back in 2008, 2012, which are years clearly that we had some issues around drought. So it is something of concern to us. And while we're getting a lot of moisture right now, all of the guidance seems to be pointing to the idea that we're going to be moving toward a hot and more dry scenario. So I'll show you how that looks. But in terms of the drought prediction specifically, where we're going to see the most improvement is going to continue to be in the Central Plains and Corn Belt. But I will tell you that's primarily in the next few weeks. I mean, we're in a situation now where we need to get all the moisture we can get in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks because everything we're seeing points to a much different scenario as we head into the high summer. So areas that are getting missed in the western and southern high plains right now could be looking at some issues as we get further into the season because, again, we need to load up on as much moisture as we can right now because these summer forecast signals that we're seeing here are looking at a warmer, drier scenario for a lot of these key growing areas for this period of time. So anything we can get here in May and really into the first week to 10 days of June is really going to be important in kind of determining what fortunes could be because all of the scenarios, all of the longer term projections, that guidance that we look at to help us develop our forecast is suggesting that. And again, mentioned before the Atlantic hurricane season, these are what we call weather wildcards, right? I mean, they can change either positively or negatively the scenario. But the thing about them, these storms, is they're fairly localized.
Jeff, I want to jump in and ask a question,
Sure.
and I think that it's one that maybe the audience has got. You showed the the ENSO area of the Pacific and the cooling of that water, and you sounded very, very certain in your tone that only continued through a period of time. What's the certainty of that versus the certainty of some of these forecasts obviously is different, but the two play hand in hand to one another. Can you kind of go into detail a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'll try. Again, the ENSO trends are longer term trends, right? I mean,
And are they a bit more predictable once you see movement over a period of time? Is that fair to say?
that's absolutely fair to say, because we see changes occur over very long time scales. So we can kind of see the whites of its eyes, right?
Okay.
As it's coming. And again, we have all this guidance to basically tell us that once you start these transitions, they tend to really get rolling. Most years. I mean, if you look back at the historical record, these transitions tend to occur fairly quickly. I mean, what we've seen in the last couple years, going from the La Nina to the El Nino and then back, can be fairly regular. That said, we came out of a 3-year La Nina, right? So, I mean, the patterns can shift, but once things start to change, we're pretty good at being able to predict where that's going to go. And again, we've been watching this for many months, and ever since the first vestiges of the demise of El Nino were suggested, like way back in the wintertime. So we've had a lot of chance to look at this, and with each passing month, the observational data and the forecast data are really giving us good confidence that this is going to happen. Now, that the impact on weather can differ a little bit, because that's one of several things that we look at that can actually, project the weather going forward. But we know historically that ENSO can be a very strong factor. So that's why we're always monitoring it. We're always looking at it. We're always trying to give you the best idea when we think these onsets are going to occur.
So I guess as we transition, not to set you up, but you're going to tell us all the good news now, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good news, right. Remember, I'm just the messenger. That's what I'm going with. Okay, so let's go short range first. Let's take a look at the next 2 weeks. Minimum temperature on the left, maximum temperature on the right. And again, these are anomalies. So in terms of the minimum temperatures, a little bit above average over the next 2 weeks. Again, 50s and 60s, nothing too anomalous, if you will. Again, the cooler conditions, relatively speaking, are out across the west. We're seeing that those cooler sea surface temperatures, that onshore flow that tends to provide clouds and wet weather. And then here's the max temperature anomalies. And so this is over a 14-day period, right? So it's kind of hard to project. But if you look at the next week, you look at the next 7 days, we're going to get a nice warm up across the plains and Corn Belt. We're going to see 80s, maybe even some spot 90s across parts of the southern plains. But we're going to get a little bump of summer. But this is also suggesting that the following week, the last week of May, we're going to see a much colder push coming in from the north. So we'll still hold on to some pretty good temperatures across the southern plains, but we'll see temperatures kind of drop more into the 70s, could even see some 60s across parts of the north. So, these sharp swings can certainly happen during the springtime. We're not yet in a pattern that's going to support kind of consistent hot and dry conditions. We're still in this kind of transitional pattern. And that's going to bring more moisture, right? So the next 7 days on the left, the 8 to 14-day period on the right. So again, very broad chance for moisture across a lot of the key growing areas. Half inch, nothing too exceptional. But again, that area in western Kansas down to West Texas and points in the southwest look to generally get missed. Interesting here in days 8 to 14, it certainly has a signature that suggests the invasion of cold air from the north and kind of the storms that precede that cooler weather and extend up across the northern plains. I'm a little bit suspect, frankly, of all that moisture suggested for Kansas. Again, because that's an area that's continued to get missed. And while I would love to say that this looks like a certainty, precipitation forecast beyond 7 days can be a little dicey at times. So we'll take a look at it. We'll keep watching it. I mean, any moisture is going to be good moisture. So hopefully they'll be able to get some. Not much to talk about in terms of freeze. Again, the date of the last spring freeze on the left. We can still get freezes across the far north in the first half of May. But the actual minimum temperatures forecast for the back part of May here, nothing of concern, really just outside, mostly in the Rockies, nothing outside of the Rockies. So I think we can kind of take freeze off the table at this point. 15 to 28 days, this takes us into kind of the mid part of June. Still suggesting warmer than normal temperatures, but again, this is over a 2-week period. I would say the best chance for the above normal temperatures is going to be over that south central parts of the U.S. So Kansas on south, certainly into Texas, appears like that's going to be the area for the most consistent above normal warmth. And then this looks like a pretty decent precipitation forecast, and this takes us into the first part of June. So, if realized, we're still looking at good moisture chances. So for us, this is going to feel important because we need to get as much moisture as we can, as I mentioned before, in these coming weeks. You can start to see some vestiges of some drier weather there, continuing in the western high plains and across the western states. But again, everything to the east is still looking fairly well watered. So this also means that we're still going to have potential issues with some late planting. And Brooks, you mentioned some replant. It feels like that's in the works. That's still something that can happen given the pattern that we're in. And that's going to come with severe weather. This is looking at weeks 1 and 2, weeks 3 and 4 on the right. We are fully in the severe weather season, and right now it's on steroids, right? I mean, we've got a tremendous amount of severe weather. We've got the perfect setup for it, And you can see here that we've got a high chance across much of the plains. A little bit lower in the Corn Belt, but I would expect we'll still see chances there as well. Okay, so let's get into the longer term forecasts. This is now looking at the entirety of June. And so temperature wise, I mean, everything looks fairly warm. It's going to be a fairly warm summer. The focus of the heat is going to be in the southwest. We're going to get summer high pressure that's going to be setting up. So, you know, we're feeling that most areas will trend above normal. A little bit more transitional as you head into the Corn Belt here, a little bit closer to normal. Precipitation, again, still possible with an active storm track across the north. These storms kind of drop down out of the northwest and then pick up some Gulf of Mexico moisture. So we're still indicating the potential for some decent moisture across the East Coast and kind of even chances for the Corn Belt. But we're starting to see the idea of this hotter and drier scenario setting up for the Southwest and the Southern Plains and expanding up into some of those areas that have been a bit drier already. So, you know, this is really the start of where we think we're going to have to be concerned about a hot and dry summer. And here we are in July, right? So still the focus of the heat across much of the Southwest, a little bit more transitional again further east. But the big story is clearly the expansion of the drier conditions into the plains, into the Central Plains, into the Western Corn Belt. Again, the best chance is going to be over the Western High Plains. You can see some of the darker shades here representing an even higher chance of below normal precipitation. So, and again, we're ramping up the heat of summer. So we could be looking at many days of 90s, potentially even hotter across parts of the South. But the biggest thing is setting up that summer high pressure that's going to be spreading that dryness across the plains and Western Corn Belt. If for producers in the East, we've still got a good situation there, though. And this certainly could be helped by the potential for tropical storms as well. And then finally here in August, kind of more of the same. I mean, temperatures will be above normal for most areas. Even normal is going to be most days in the 90s, frankly. But again, the expansion of drought continues off to the north and east, fully encompassing the Western Corn Belt. Not sure why the hole here in western Kansas. I really feel like much of the plains is going to be in a drier scenario as we're going to be dominated by summer high pressure. Interesting signature here in Texas, which could be an early signature of some tropical storms. So again, this is what we call one of those weather wildcards. So if we can get some storms into the Gulf of Mexico, start to bring some pretty copious amounts of rain coming with them, there's a chance we could, you know, at least alleviate some drought-like conditions. Again, August is typically a pretty active period for hurricanes, and we think it's going to be a pretty good season, as I said before. Just giving you another opinion here, and just if anything, just to show you that our thinking is very much in keeping with other agencies and what they're looking at. Again, this is from the Climate Prediction Center and their monthly seasonal temperature and precipitation outlooks for the 3-month period. Very similar. Again, the highest anomalies, the warmest anomalies are going to be across the Southwest into Texas. Warmer than normal across most other areas, but it's really that moisture, right? Take a look at the below normal moisture expanding out into the plains from the Western High Plains. So again, this idea of this stagnant summer high pressure setting up in that area is definitely has legs. And out ahead of that, though, we'll see good fetches of moisture in the east, so they should be in a much better scenario. Drought outlook, very interesting here. Calling this the seasonal drought outlook. This takes us May, June, and July. And if you take a look at all of the drought removal or improvement over much of this area, a little skeptical again about that southwest part of Kansas, but it certainly suggests an increase in drought potential for parts of West Texas into the Southwest. Frankly, most of this is within the next month. You know, once we get into kind of late June, July, August time period, the equation looks like it could change. I don't know if wildfire is on your radar at all, but just thought we'd provide you our idea on wildfire at this point. I mean, we've got a lot of pretty good moisture at this point. So again, we're just focused on weather conditions conducive to wildfires. We know they can start in a lot of various ways. Just based on what we're seeing right now, I mean, we're kind of taking California out of the picture just because they continue to have some pretty good soil moisture given a pretty significant winter of moisture. But those dry areas right now are the ones we're kind of highlighting that could further be a problem, could further dry, and could provide some tinder-like vegetation for these kind of wildfires. So we'll continue to take a look at that. So Brooks, any questions I can address? Because I do want to take a couple of minutes to talk about South America.
You know, I did jokingly say you had some good news in there, and it does look like for the Eastern Corn Belt, you had some optimism as far as moderation of temperatures and some of that precipitation being there in July and August. And we do have a lot of folks on here. I see Ohio and Pennsylvania, Maryland on here. So there was a segment of that was somewhat optimistic as well, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's typically what happens when you get the high pressure setting up in the plains. That provides the flow from the Gulf of Mexico, where we really get a boost in the storms and the moisture associated with those storms. So yeah, we're feeling pretty good about the Eastern Corn Belt and points east.
You know,
Sure.
Jeff, before we transition to South America, Sterling, I think it's a really good idea right now to kind of update folks on the production at risk in South America right now, and that's been a big change. Early on in the year, you started to put out some production estimates on Brazilian corn specifically, and while a lot of that is the safrinha crop, we're in a critical weather period down there. Give folks an idea, because this one blew me away over the last 36 months in production numbers. You've got a great chart, and I actually have it at my fingertips if you don't have it, of just how many more bushels Brazil by itself is producing on corn than it was 3 years ago.
Let's grab that chart here. I have
Jeff,
that
I
in
like
here.
to put him on the spot like this every once in a while
Okay.
and see how
Yeah.
quick he can come up with this stuff.
How
No,
quickly I
that's
can
good.
come up with the Brazil soy production chart here.
So
Of course, now Brooks is kind of taking advantage of things a little bit here because Monday there was a catastrophe here. My normal computer that I
We've
do
really
most
thrown him
everything
for a loop,
with
Jeff.
has
New technology, new
Oh, boy.
earpieces. It's
Oh,
the new
boy.
Sterling.
Oh my.
kind of blew up. And so I'm kind of working with things that aren't exactly how I would normally like to do things. So having
Well,
to find things here. Hold on
I
here.
actually have some of your work at my fingertips.
Well, if you could pop
So
that up, that would probably be
Okay.
best
Oh,
for our
I
viewers.
can certainly do that. Now, keep in mind these were estimates from a little bit earlier in the year, but they tell a great story as far as why our attention is shifting to Brazil at this point in time. Let me switch over here and I'll show you
Sure.
some of Sterling's work from earlier in the year. And you know, I like to brag on him quite a bit because he was ahead of the curve here. And see if we can share this. And I'm going to make that my screen. Jeff, can you see my screen there?
Yeah.
Now we have obviously we fell short. Well, that's not the one I was looking for. Let's see if I can find it.
Here.
You guys are probably
Hold on
interested.
here. Hold on here.
Let me see if
Here
I can.
is soybean Brazil. All right.
I want to before I go there, Sterling. Let me show some of your let me show a little bit of your work on corn. Bear with me just a moment.
Here. Got it. Got it. I've got
You
it.
got
I've
it.
got
Okay.
it. I've
All right.
got
I'll
it
let
here.
you engineer it
I
then.
think I've got it here. Hold on. Let's see here.
You know, Jeff, while Sterling's pulling that up, we did have a question come across from Wayne out in Ohio.
Mhm.
Sterling alluded to issues with the European crop, and Wayne's question specific to Russia and wheat. What is the weather doing to affect that wheat crop in Russia right now?
Yeah, great question. There has been a pretty significant freeze winter kill in some of those key growing areas, I guess in southwest Russia. I can't remember the actual provinces or whatever they call them, but it was a high producing wheat area that really got bit hard. I think they had temperatures that were in the teens for several hours for many days. So I don't know the numbers in terms of the hit, but it was pretty significant from everything I've read. So that's
Yeah.
the biggest weather thing right now that I'm aware of. That could be pretty impactful.
So Sterling, you found your way here, and you've even
Yes.
taken it bushels.
Yeah.
And this amazes me. This amazes me. I don't think, Jeff, we would have been talking about South American weather very often in the month of May on a
Mhm.
call like this. Maybe even 5 years ago, while it was impactful. Sterling, tell us what your illustration shows here.
This is Brazilian corn production, and this goes back to 2010, and we're up to 5.39 billion bushels of corn. Where if we go back here just even to 2015, we were at 3.34 billion
Incredible,
bushels.
in,
So they have
incredible growth.
incrementally driven this much higher. Now, the USDA came out with some ideas. I'm going to switch over here to soybeans real quick.
While you switch over
And
there, Sterling, Jeff, just dialogue here.
Mhm.
So, of that 5.39 billion bushels, we estimate that around 62% of that is double crop corn. And when we talk about double crop anything, whether that's beans in the US, corn down there, weather plays maybe even a more critical role in production numbers there. Tell us the differences between a full season crop, maybe in a double crop, and that window of opportunity for weather to affect yields.
Yeah,
well,
sorry.
no, go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
Yeah, a great question. I mean, it's really hard to answer because, the weather it depends on what the weather trends are like. I mean, during the season. I mean, during the first seasons, we've seen differences in weather between Brazil and Argentina. Last year, Argentina had terrible weather, heat and drought, while Brazil was gangbusters, had a great season in terms of weather. This year, it's been just the opposite in many cases. Um, and now for second crop, I mean, this is really interesting, but there are some issues with the second crop corn right now. We've got some of those key areas from Mato Grosso all the way down into Goiás, Minas Gerais, some of those key production areas of Safrina. Heat and drought have really taken a toll here of late over the last several weeks. Starting to hear more hits to potential yield there. Not to be outdone, not to change the subject, but not to be outdone by the fact that Rio Grande do Sul has had historic flooding. And reading that there was still 20 to 25% of soybeans still in the field.
And
And
I
so,
think that's where Sterling was kind of going with this
yeah,
thing
yeah,
was soybeans more so than corn.
right.
But you don't think about flooding this time of the year affecting soybean production in Brazil. And I think Sterling's going to give us some of that information as well.
Yeah, if you look at our chart here, this is a chart of soybean production in Brazil. And we took this back to 2015 or so. And as you can see here, we're at 3.56 billion bushels. We were looking, initial predictions were we were going to be at 6 full billion bushels. And as you can see here, when the weather turned a little bit south on us and we had these flooding issues, these estimates have come down
Mhm.
noticeably, meaningfully, meaning a lot of the fat that we put in year over year did get taken out of the market. Now, for next year, this chart is going to be sticking itself up north of that 6 billion number, and I'm going to guess probably at about 6.3 or 6.4, because there are ideas that we are going to see even more production increases coming out of Brazil for next year. But again, much like what we see on that May WASDE with these ambitious yield numbers, sometimes the guesses are a lot bigger than what actually materializes because of the weather issues, which is what Jeff alluding to with switching to El Nino and how that affects South American production.
Yeah, I was here. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Tell us about El Nino in South America, because
Well,
they need some good news.
well, we're moving into a La Nina, right?
La Nina.
So,
Excuse me, I'm mixed up. I'm all
Well,
discombobulated.
it's
yeah,
a
that's
southern
all right.
hemisphere thing, right?
Yeah,
Everything's backwards. That's what it is.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, I heard up to 5 million tons of soybeans are at risk potentially just out of Rio Grande do Sul, which is not a small number. So, and, you know, I don't know if we want to go into the slides, but the bottom line is we're still looking at very similar trends. We've got, strong high pressures just sitting right over Brazil, hot and dry conditions for those areas continuing. So, that second crop corn, is under some stress. So we might see some issues around that as we head closer to harvest, and more wet weather possibly for those areas that are already wet. So it's to your point, it's not something we typically take a look at much beyond April, May, but the weather has really been crazy, right? And it's been very impactful. So it's something we continue to look at.
Jeff, we definitely want to look at those slides. We've got a pretty attentive audience on here. I just actually got a text for that. So what the trends are in South America right now. If you don't care, we'll give you control of the screen again.
Okay, hang on. Right.
We don't get you very often on here, so we want to make sure we utilize every minute we've got.
All right. Well, I'm very pleased that you allow me to do this. Okay, so let me just this up. Screen up. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay. Just bring this. Okay, South America weather. Okay, so taking a look back at April, temperature anomalies on the left, precipitation anomalies on the right. Very warm across much of southern Brazil during that period of time, cooler in Argentina. For the month, particularly the first, let's say 3 weeks of April, we were in a very wet situation for Mato Grosso do Sul and areas to the far south. You can see that here. But take a look at this strip of dryness, again, from Mato Grosso all the way down into Minas Gerais, Goiás, Sao Paulo, those areas that we know are high producing areas. And this is May to date, and those trends have amplified even more. I mean, take a look at some of these anomalous temperatures. I mean, these are temperatures that are still well into the 90s and upwards of 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit above typical. So, and then just further to the south, take a look how cool it's been in Argentina. I've been hearing some reports of some scattered frost across parts of western and southern growing areas of Argentina as well. But take a look at the moisture. I mean, so again, bone dry for that key Safrina area in Brazil. But then here we are down in Rio Grande do Sul, and take a look at just how wet it's been. I mean, it's been historic flooding. It's been kind of all over the news. I mean, they saw, some areas saw like 4 months of rain in a week period. So that's the kind of anomalous scenario we're looking at. And so they're still assessing what that's going to look like, but certainly it's not been a good thing. And take a look at this.
Jeff,
Sorry,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
stop you real quick. That illustration right there, that opens my eyes. I don't know how many people are listening, but we're concentrated so much on that flood down in the southern part that we make the assumption that the flood is impacting the corn acreage down there as well. And your model here and your map shows really just the opposite. It may be the dry, warm temperatures affecting the corn more so than that wet area. So definitely something that I've learned on the call.
Okay, yeah, for sure. It's just crazy. I mean, it's just weird to see, these, very different weather trends in such a close space and just for such a long period of time. And you can imagine how that's kind of resulted in the soil moisture situation. I mean, that blue there in Rio Grande do Sul, northeast Argentina, I mean, that is deep moisture. But again, you don't have to go that far north and take a look at just how dry it is.
Wow.
And those are some of the key Safrina areas right now. So I got to say, we're going to be pretty concerned about some yield reductions as we head further into time because we're still looking at the same scenario over the next 2 weeks at a minimum, right? We're still looking at those very sluggish weather patterns. Again, pretty warm, fairly dry, but you don't have to go that much further south. And again, cooler and wetter. So just very stark patterns that are adversely impacting it both ways, right? Hot and dry or too wet. And then those patterns look like they'll continue to be supported. We may see a little bit of a breakdown as we head further into their winter season, but overall, it still looks like these trends are going to hold for a good portion of the next several weeks. So again, we typically don't see these kind of very impactful trends, but certainly this year is one of them.
Let's stop for a second and kind of talk about how that map translates to the U.S. supply and demand balance sheet, Sterling. It seems like a stretch. You know, we're looking at the central Brazil, hot dry period in May. How does that translate to a potential change on our supply and demand charts?
Well, what it can create is a chain reaction with our export number. Brazil has smaller supplies, Argentina has smaller supplies. The world needs the corn, so that makes us the new provider. So we could potentially see a change in export numbers, particularly for maybe old crop, depending on how much corn is really sitting in the bins in certain places,
So,
not
so
in the
let
US.
me stop you right there because old crop, our season's over with here pretty soon. Whenever we're looking at carryouts, we're looking at the end of August. So we're looking at anything that's going to affect pretty much not our supply at this point in time. Our supply is what it is. Probably not going to be changes in acreage and yields from last year. So we're concentrating on demand. And in that
Right.
demand, just to remind people, you know, there's three places essentially and kind of boil it down. Domestic demand kind of is what it is. Okay. Stuck in that 5.6, 5.7 billion range. Ethanol demand is what it is. 5.35, 5-ish, whatever you want to call it there, 5.35 billion. So exports, okay. Realistically, how much of this corn in South America was going to hit that export market in June, July, August that could potentially have an effect on us? And if it does, like, give us an idea. Is it 50 million? Is it a 100 million max? What kind of number are we looking at?
I would say somewhere between 50 and 100 million would be a fairly good estimate. And how we can measure if there's going to be demand, two items that come out every Thursday you need to watch are export sales and our inspections. And frankly, they haven't really been that good for old crop yet. Part of that is because we've had this recent bounce in prices tends to scare buyers off. But if the people who need the corn, and one of these places in particular is China, really in particular China, if they find themselves getting tight on corn, they will come to us to buy it most likely. Now, I'm not going to get too political here, but the administration did announce some new sanctions and some new trade restrictions on China. Some of them were towards EVs, were fairly symbolic. Others were for other assorted items. Now, when you push China on them exporting stuff to us, they get mad and they don't want to import things from us. So, remember, China doesn't operate like we do. They're a command economy. They have no problem with you're used to eating, a pound and a half of pork a week, Brooks. You get a half a pound. They have no problem doing that to people. So that is the biggest variable because most of that corn that was being grown in Brazil was destined for China. So that's where we need to kind of watch and see if China will be willing to step up and come back into the market. And what that will do is that will reduce this year's balance sheet, which in hand will reduce next year's balance sheet and hopefully produce some higher prices.
You know, Jeff, Sterling, this is what I love about the whole game here, seeing how it all ties in what Jeff presents on whether how it practically applies to supply and demand, and actually how it filters down and not only affects, an AIP's business and agency's business, but ultimately our ultimate customer, and that's the farmer's business. So I love this stuff. I wish we could do this on a more regular basis, because you can kind of see how it all works together. With that, Jeff, it looks like you're ready for some questions. We're getting close to that 1 hour in. Are there any questions out there for Jeff? You guys can use the chat button. Sterling, anything that comes to your mind while we got Jeff on here, we can pick his brain on.
No, he's just telling me I'm going to have a bigger than normal water bill once again for this summer because the grass is healthy and I put a lot of manual labor into it and I don't want anything dying. So the sprinklers will be running full speed, not just here, but I'm guessing in the farmland 15 miles to my west.
I'm sure there's a parametric out there for you, Sterling. We can get you fixed up with something out there next year. Protect yourself.
Oh, Sterling vintage.
Well, I don't see any new ones come across the chat button here. But Jeff, lots of good information. Lots of good information. I think, if we translate this to markets, and Sterling, I don't want to keep people much more over an hour, not unlike any year, we're at that time period where as a producer, we've got to watch. I think with the news that Jeff brought us, whether it's North America, South America, we may want to look into something that a lot of producers don't like to utilize, and that's placing some type of floors or some type of derivative strategy out there that allow us a floor, because the supply and demand tables still look somewhat burdensome overall, long term. But there's these blips of opportunity that you don't want to miss. Sterling, you've got a chart pulled up here. I bet you've got an idea for us. You've got December corn, it looks like, pulled up.
Yeah, this is December corn. And, guide the future by the past. You can see our nice bounce here. And this was that fund short covering that came in. These other lines that I have on here are Fibonacci retracements. And this is the high when December corn for this contract actually became viable. This is kind of noise back here. And as you can see, from high to low, we retraced it exactly 61.8%. Exactly. We had 3 flaring highs that tested, as you can see today, we're back down all the way back to the 20-day moving average. We are finding ourselves here. This is a sell signal here, and the RSI is weakening. So we have entered a corrective phase, meaning the funds use computers. The funds are looking exactly at this. When they got to that number, that's when the buying turned back into selling. So we are probably looking at some near-term pressure. But again, until we get, really above $5 or even $5.20 a bushel, expect the bounces to be relatively short-lived. This one was fairly good. It lasted 2 weeks, but the funds had to take off half their shorts to do it. So the market is still weak. It's still tenuous. If Jeff's forecast comes into play and that works out, and we see dry weather, particularly from, let's say, Lincoln, Nebraska, east into Iowa, that's going to be problem one. If we can see Chinese tensions ease a little bit and their economy is very bad, they don't want to see food inflation, we can see them buy a little bit of corn, we can change this chart. But right now, it's kind of heavy, and it looks like we're probably going lower from where we are right now. And I would suspect we would find some support in here right around these lows, which right around 477. So maybe we've got another nickel to a dime of downside here before the market finds some new stabilization, and maybe we can see a new story. But again, we have to pay attention, and if you get a sharp bounce, you need to take advantage of it. And if we look at soybeans, that picture is even more. As you can see here, we had this, this incredibly sharp bounce. And if we look at where we could expect the market to go back here, that's the high, that's the low. You can see we made about a 50% retracement. And again, we ran out of gas and couldn't make a full retracement. So again, let's pay attention every day, because the story has now gone from we're just bearish and sad to something where there is some potential bullish inputs that can drive prices short term and maybe long term, but it's going to take, China and Jeff to really get those prices moving.
No pressure, Jeff. No
Yeah,
pressure.
right.
No pressure, Jeff.
Yeah, right. Okay. Me and China. Great. Got it.
Well, we are approaching the hour mark, and of course, we didn't get too deep into commodities, but I'm glad we concentrated upon what we did. Sterling, we're always out here for calls and emails. If you've got questions specific to the market, don't hesitate to contact your marketing rep, and we'll be happy to get on the phone, answer any questions that you guys have got. I think with the hour coming up, we will say goodbye to you for the month of May. Sterling, we don't have much on the calendar for a bit. I think the next thing we've got is WASDE in June. Of course, an extra meeting in June with that acreage report that comes out June 30th. That's always a big one you don't want to miss.
Let me check the date on that June 30th report, because I think that may actually be a little bit early this
Yeah,
year.
our March 31st report this year was March 27th. But if you're in the industry, it's always going to be called the March 31st and the June 30th report, right?
Right. And here, let's go ahead. Oh, here, 6/30. Let's see when that date is, because I think, actually, we can just move the calendar here. June 28th is a Friday.
Okay.
So we will have that report there. And then we'll be leading up to the July WASDE. But this June 30th report is going to be much more important. We've got some weather variations going on here, and these ideas about the lower corn acres, we'll see just how well they materialize. So.
All right. Well, very good. Great meeting, folks. We will see you next time around with the WASDE in June. Everybody have a good weekend, and hopefully it dries up where it's wet and you get moisture where it's not, and a good planting season over the next couple of weeks.
And make sure to read the daily emails and listen to the podcast, and make sure to read this week's weekly wrap up, because I have a whole litany about inflation for you. So you can read that and have a cocktail while you're doing it.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.